right, so this clicker is not a real clicker, is what I was told. But we'll see what happens. All right, that's my face. Let's talk about me. Because you have to start every one of these with a little bit about yourself. The intention behind this whole thing is to help kind of show you guys how you can create a great brand by writing only great content and drive a lot of traffic and then build a huge business. That's the intention behind this. I started Greatist a little bit to do that, but mostly because I grew up struggling with my weight and felt like there wasn't a brand that spoke to me as I was trying to figure out how to get healthier. And when I turned on the TV shows and saw Dr. Oz, or I searched in Google, or I opened up magazines and saw all these amazing people on the cover, I thought, these people aren't speaking my language and make me feel worse about myself instead of better. Why isn't there a brand that speaks to the way that I think the world is shifting, that people's mindset is changing around how they think about health? Why is it that we're not talking about health and fitness as a part of living a better life instead of always talking about it as the point? So I became really obsessed with how do we build a brand like that. And so this company that I'm building, Greatist, is built on this idea that it's my life mission is to change the way people think about health and help make health more accessible to everyone so that people can feel it and touch it and just work on improvement. So that's why I started this company. I started with content because I couldn't figure out how to reach as many people as I possibly could with that message. And so this was me. I've been on both sides. I guess my six-pack abs were cut off. They're only 4-packs now. But I've been on both sides of this. The biggest kid in the class. I've had six-pack abs. And in both times, I felt worse than I ever have, and I felt totally gypped by this whole system. So I created Greatist as an idea, an identity for anyone who's just trying to improve. Like an artist works in art, right? A Greatist just works on being great. So what does that actually mean for us? Well, what we do today is we produce amazing content. We write content with this in mind, that sort of mindset and approach of a healthier world. And the way that we do that is actually through extremely high-quality content like this. You might think we're writing thousands of articles every day, but you'd be wrong. Where other media companies have zigged, we've sort of zagged. We write less than 5 articles every single day. Every single article that we write, every fact is cited by a scientific study from PubMed. Every article is approved by multiple experts. So everything is science-backed and expert-approved. But most importantly, it's written in that voice that's real and authentic, the voice that I always wanted to hear from, a voice that's just like my friend who's just a little further along and cheering me on. So what has that led to? We've grown 300% year over year in terms of our traffic on average, today reaching around 11 million people every single month. We've done that organically, never spending a cent, with just great content. Today we reach 70% of our audience on mobile, mostly millennial, mostly female. If you take out all the landing pages that we have, the average time people spend reading our articles is between 6 and 12 minutes. People are actually reading them. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about why I believe quality wins over quantity, and why I think that's true today than it's actually ever been before. The reason is that the future, I believe, is completely distributed. This idea of you own a website, you've got your homepage, we'll be laughing about that in a couple years. The truth is that you need to go wherever your audience is. I'm going to talk a little bit about who your audience is and how to find them and where they're at. But ultimately, the only way to win today is to go to where they are and actually have the conversation, start building a relationship there. So this idea of building a media company means we have to be everywhere at all times, unlike before when it was just about churning and juicing views. So how do you win? And the answer, I believe, is actual, real, true engagement. So somehow I decided that ABCD was going to simplify things. I don't know. Whatever. Let's go with it for now. We're just going to start with audience, then we're going to go to brand, we're going to go to the distribution, and then whatever C was. The audience. All right, so if you guys would like to follow along and do this with me, I came up with an exercise to start thinking about your content marketing efforts. And the exercise is pretty simple. And you can do it right now if you want. I'm going to kind of speed through because, I don't know, I have a countdown clock and stuff. So, but the first thing here is who is your audience? And if you guys are building a company or you're writing something for somebody, whatever you're doing right now, you should be able to answer that hopefully relatively fast. Who is your audience? And the second question is, what are you calling them to do? What do you want them to do? An example would be, I'm trying to reach suburban housewives, and I'm trying to sell them jewelry, right? So you write this down, and then the exercise of the Littlejohn is actually taking who you think your audience is and then making it as excruciatingly narrow as you possibly can. I mean, look at what you wrote down and make it so narrow you're not even quite sure if these people exist. But if you knew who they were, if you could reach them, you could super serve them in a way that very few people could. It's a little scary to try and limit your audience. At Greatist, you'd think that as we've grown bigger, we've actually broadened who we're trying to reach. And the truth is actually just the opposite. In the early days of Greatist, my intention was hey, we're going to be the health site for everybody. Wouldn't that be amazing? And then we realized we didn't know everybody. And so we were okay, well, we're all millennials. Let's write for millennials. So we started writing for millennials. And then we thought, you know what? There's a lot of space in health and wellness. We should write to the kind of millennials we think need our help most. And that's millennials just trying to improve, who aren't always perfect. And so every step of the way, we've sort of actually narrowed and narrowed and narrowed who our audience is. And that's actually meant that every time we write anything, anytime we speak to our audience in any way, shape, or form, it's all going through a more and more constrained filter. One, it removes a lot of ambiguity, but most importantly, it means suddenly we become uniquely relevant to that audience. And so as scary as it might sound, this is the first, and I almost think the key, is figuring out who are you going to be the best at serving, and how narrowly can you get that audience down. And the second thing is, what do you want them to do? And this is important. Maybe you're not just trying to sell jewelry, but you're actually trying to give people a new lease on life, change the way that they think about themselves when they walk outside, and change their confidence. Maybe it's about saying they're actually in control of their body image in a way that they haven't been before. Whatever it is that is you're calling your audience towards, the more broad, the more ambitious, the more mission-based it is, the more what you're writing actually has a purpose and can resonate with people. People don't just want to buy jewelry or click on no one actively wakes up every morning and goes, man, do I want to click on a site. Nobody in the world is doing that. They want to be a part of something, and they want to start building a relationship with somebody, some brand, something. And so this is an audience, this is an exercise that actually we go through every quarter at Greatist, and it just keeps going narrow the audience, broaden what we're trying to accomplish. So it's all because, and I sort of said this earlier, it's all because I believe if you're not super serving someone, if you're not really relevant to someone, you're not relevant enough to anyone. Think about how many things you could read every day today. How many things you could read right now? Looking down at your phones, which maybe some of you are, imagine how many things you could read. There's an unlimited amount of awesome shit. So how do you actually stand out among that? And so I believe it has to be uniquely relevant to who you're trying to reach. Okay, so you've identified your overall audience and what you're trying to call them towards. Now, how do you speak to them? I think people forget this step a lot. And you don't have to read all this or memorize this. Please don't memorize it. This is actually who our brand sounds like. This is the personality profile for Greatist. It started out as me, right? It started out with my voice. I was editing and writing in the early days, and it's evolved to a point where we know exactly who our brand is, what it sounds like, and it's just like that friend who's a little further along. Frankly, it's a lot better voice than mine, which is a real relief. But this is how crazy specific we get, because we are handing off our voice to every single person who touches our brand. Everyone, from the people who are writing the content and managing our social media accounts, of course, but even the product managers who are writing little bits here and there. Anything that is touching our audience in any way needs to sound like this one and consistent voice. And so what we did in the early days, we took a stab at this, and then over time, we've evolved it. But if you haven't written this down, if you don't have an answer to, if I walked into a bar and I met my brand, what would that brand be like? You've got some work to do. And a handy-dandy way of approaching this is what I call this tone of voice checklist. And so it may sound trivial, Like, do you use emojis? Which emojis do you use? Like, do you write in all caps? Do you not write in all caps? At Greatist, for example, when we write on Twitter, we're capitalizing the first answer of the first letter of every response. Why do we do that? It's like all this added time, but there's a reason. And for every one of these boxes, whether you check them or not, there's going to be a reason. For us, it's that we want to be professional and legitimate, but at the same time, we don't want to be, like that casual with people. We want them to take us seriously. So each of these things, we started out using more like social media lingo and, like hat tip. But then we realized our audience actually wasn't living and breathing in this world. They didn't even know what hat tip meant. And so we stopped using it. That's not what our voice evolved into. And so each of these things, again, might sound trivial, but will force you to have a conversation and make some decision that then can become a list of rules as to how your brand exists and evolves over time. And this is all for you to figure out. I really like my acronyms. I don't know. I've been trying to get an M in there somehow, but it's fine. I haven't succeeded. So the idea is, if you figure out your brand and you figure out your audience, what is that all for? And the answer is, now you can figure out where that audience is in a place where they will be interested and active and engaged with that voice that you just created. And that's where you can uniquely start to engage and make a difference in that audience. And here's so many of the examples. But the assumption most people give is, okay, I'm going to be on Facebook because Facebook is huge and everyone's on Facebook. But actually, most success stories start out in a smaller, focused place, nail that audience in a way that no other brand really does, and then grow from there. Greatist is a perfect example. We actually exist because of Pinterest. We sort of went all in on Pinterest in the early days. We were one of the brands in health and fitness and food and drink, definitely one of the first brands and by far the most innovative brand on there. We today are still in the top 20 most pinned root domains of all time on Pinterest because we figured out that's where our millennial audience, who is actively trying to improve and actively trying to cook healthier and actively trying to look for workouts, was uniquely there and wanted to hear from our visual, focused, accessible voice. And so that's an example of what we did, but like, where is the right platform for you? It could be an offline conference. It could be a subreddit. It could be anywhere. It could be Musically, right? Something new and growing and cool. The key is you're not just guessing at that. You've identified who your audience is and what you're calling them towards, and then you're bringing that brand and voice to where it'll resonate with them most. So then what do you do once you're there? What is the content that you create? So I'm obsessed, some of you might know, I don't know who's out there because I can't see anybody, so probably none of you know, but I'm very into Walt Disney. I'm like obsessed with Disney as a company, and I'm mostly obsessed with Walt Disney, this like very fascinating entrepreneur. When he was building Disneyland, he and his Imagineers decided that they were going to adopt this practice from circuses where they would have what was called a weenie. Something basically huge that like drew you in towards it. So if any of you have been to Disneyland, which I hope all of you have been and go every year like I do, if you go to Disneyland, I go to Disney World sometimes, fine. When you walk in, the first thing you see is this castle and you head towards it because it's huge. And then suddenly you're there and suddenly you're buying all this food and suddenly you're going on all these smaller rides and then you turn to your left and there's another big huge thing for you to head towards, so you head towards that way. This idea of a weenie, which my team stopped letting me use and now we call it tent poles because me just yelling weenie at the office seemed like a thing people weren't really super into. Disney as a company though is basically like the best at this. They call them franchises. Some media companies call them tent poles. These are not just doing as much as possible to see what sticks. It's actually just the opposite. It's investing almost all your resources into one huge honking thing that if it's successful, you can monetize across everything in every way and touch people for years in like an unbelievably huge way. Disney takes a Monsters, Inc., right? And I mean, I would have used, I'm not having Frozen is probably an even better, more relevant example today. Like, they take these brands, people see the movies, then they buy the sequels to the movies, then there appears offline when you go to the parks, and then you can buy their apparel, and then you can download their apps and video games. And it's like an unbelievable sort of 360 attack on anyone who's interested in that thing. So that's, of course, an extreme example. These are multi-billion-dollar franchises we're talking about, and I think you should put the same method and strategy to what you do with your content. So this 10x method, I don't think I came up with that, but the idea is purely that your job is not to write an article on the subject, but the article on the subject. Not to create as much content as you possibly can around an area, but actually to produce the best, most comprehensive, exhaustive content that you can in a specific area and cover it best for your audience. So an extreme example of this would be literally you just multiply it by 10. So we noticed that our audience is a perfect example of an article in which our audience is actually like 18 to 34-year-olds just trying to get healthier. They can't necessarily afford a therapist, but they're actively trying to improve their mental health. So here we are, super serving that audience, not just with 8, but 81 resources that they can turn to. And the reason is because we went on Facebook and we looked at what our audience was sharing. We were like, okay, we're interested in this audience that's starting to get interested in mental health within our demographic. What are they sharing? We saw that they were sharing 8 mental health resources, and we said, okay, perfect. We're going to take weeks of time, produce the best freaking piece of content that's ever been written on this subject, and hand it literally right back to them. If you were to oversimplify what we do at Greatist, it's that. Find the audience, find the platform they're on, do a 10 times better job than the thing they're already sharing, and give it right back to them. This is the best piece of content on the subject. And it does really well. A similar example, so that you don't feel like you always have to write like a long list, which I think has various results depending on your category, and sometimes people hate listicles. But this is another example. Eating healthy for one. I bet that none of you would have addressed that that's a real challenge, but when you think about it, people, millennials again, right, often are single and living alone, and they want to eat healthy or cooking for themselves, and they don't quite, a big thing in their way is like, we would love to cook healthy, but everything you buy is like made for a family of 4. So what we did is we actually created the ultimate healthy grocery list for one and started building out a franchise around healthy eating for one. And then we started building out a franchise for healthy eating for 2. If you were to search right now in Google or Pinterest or Facebook for healthy recipes for 2, healthy cooking for 1, we would own almost all those search terms. And it's because time and time again, we wrote the best article on all the various parts of this pie, right? It's like we don't try to cover the whole pie at once. We're covering each of the different slices in the best possible way. Sometimes people refer to this as link bait, which I think has a sort of negative connotation. Today, SEO is like waning in like an approach, but Google search has done a much better job. By the way, we get half of our traffic from organic Google search without even trying to do SEO, and it's just because we write great content that gets shared a lot. It's because the real link bait is writing the best content on the subject and having it shared a lot. And that's where it's like we're skating to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is today, to last and build like a meaningful, long-term engaged brand. So link bait can look like any of this stuff, but it's very different from what I call spike bait. Spike bait actually, though we do it at Greatist and it's a fine thing to do and you get lots of engagement, it's not something that actually shapes the way people think about your brand. If you think today to the stuff in your Facebook feed that you've looked at and liked that looked and resembled the things on the right, my guess is you couldn't name what brand actually shared it. So it's an important thing to notice because, you can serve your audience in a lot of different ways, and I like these things as much as anyone else, but these are more commodities than the link bait, these like tent poles that can be like the things people come back to you for and start building a relationship because of. Finally, you got to distribute that. So how do you distribute it? So you wrote the content, you know where you're supposed to be, and my whole approach on distributing that shit is that if you build it, they won't come. I wish that weren't true, but it's the truth. You can write amazing content, but it's not enough in today's day and age. There really genuinely is too much. So how do you stand out on each of these different platforms? And I have this, my team hates this because I talk about it all the time, is that on each platform, you ideally need to have a unique, consistent value. So that means you need to be doing something different, something better, something with a unique voice or unique tone, something that other people are not doing. You need to do it over and over again and nothing else. And that needs to be something that complements or speaks to that target audience in as best as you possibly can. And so some examples, just to explain what I mean by that. So Nat Geo, right, National Geographic, is, believe it or not, one of the most followed social media accounts on every single platform. Like literally it's the most popular on Instagram. I think it's in the top 5 most popular Instagrams, period, that aren't like famous celebrities, right? What do? Do they promote their magazine articles? Do they talk about how awesome their magazines are? Do they talk about their amazing writing? Absolutely not. They do one thing and they do it amazingly well, which is they've taken something that's core to what they do, amazing photography, right, sourced from an amazing group of contributing photographers, and they just share that photography over and over. Does that mean that their audience is probably going to buy their magazine? Maybe. There's actually probably a very good overlap between people who love that kind of photography and who are willing to go buy their magazine. But they're not just doing the same thing that they do in their magazine through Instagram. The Hustle is a perfect example of this, and I swear I wasn't paid to say this. Every day it's bringing you content that's coming through an email that's maybe even content you didn't even know that you needed. But why are you at this conference? It has nothing to do with what's actually in the email every day. Like, you're reading content and suddenly you're going to show up at this conference to learn more about how to do content better? And the answer is they're serving you in a unique, consistent way, but you are much more interesting than just that one email. It's itching one part of who you are, but who you are actually probably overlaps very well with people trying to build cool shit. And so you knowing what's going on in the news, right, general news, is a part of this whole of who you are, and so then they can push you to these events and all the amazing other products and services. So anyway, lots of other examples. I'll just point to Greatists, because I probably should. Our Instagram account is not our content. It is actually something we call Voices of a Healthy-ish Generation, and if you were to open Greatist in Instagram, and I'll follow it, which I encourage you to do, and I'll wait for 15 seconds. No, I'm kidding. It's actually capturing people's voices who are going on their own personal journeys. What is their sort of health mantra and life mantra, so that you're seeing you're not alone and this is a part of a community. But is that something we're doing anywhere else on the site? And the answer is no. It's just something that appeals to our audience in an amazing, unique, consistent way that somebody can turn to a friend and say, you should follow this Instagram account because X, and not because it's all these different various things and it's an online publication. So the other thing to say is don't be afraid to do things that don't scale. This is not my thing. This is Paul Graham's thing. But I believe in this big time, especially in the early days. And so one of the things we did right before I launched Greatist, I reached out to, I didn't know where to find the audience. I was like a super geek when it came to health and wellness content, was disappointed time and time again with what I found, but there were some individuals who were writing really nicely about stuff. And as I worked to try to create a mainstream brand, I genuinely was like, the only people I know who have this audience are these individuals that I liked. And so I wrote them 100 emails. 100 people, 100, not each of them 100 emails, 100 emails to 100 people. Wow, that's very confusing. One email to all these people, and then 70 of them responded after quite a little bit of follow-up, though not 100 of them, and shared it when we launched the website. Some of them have become friends, advisors, investors. Some of them still share our content every single day when it comes out. But we turned these influencers into stakeholders. I got them involved early. I asked them for their help and advice as we were launching the site. And then when we launched it, they shared it with their audience. That put us on the map. Pinterest took us to the next level. And now we've started to attack each of these different platforms with more of a team and with more of an emphasis on creating unique, consistent value for all of it. And I think the details matter. I put this in here because I think it's extremely underrated. I think if you were to go through a short list of all the favorite things, all the brands that you follow, all the products that you love, you would see that the details are thought through in a way that you probably never even expected. There's a short story on, again, Walt Disney, coming back to my guy, Walt Disney, when he was obsessed with the details and would literally troll the park, like go through the park and add like little pennies in odd areas to make sure that the cleaner people would catch them because he wanted it to be perfect and spotless. The key is people don't notice the details are right, but they notice when something is off. When you experience a Greatist, it's an online media publication, right? It's a new media company, but it's articles just like you'd read anywhere else, but every single thing is flawless. There are no typos, or at least as much as we could possibly, get rid of. Every little piece of text, every time we communicate with you sounds like us. Every single color is perfectly consistent with the brand. We take extreme efforts and care to cite every fact with a scientific study from PubMed. If any of you have been on Greatist, you probably didn't even know it because we don't rub it in your face, but you can tell if something is untrustworthy, and everything on our site is. And so I think the details matter in a way that people quite don't give it enough credit. So I encourage you to care about the details. All right, A, B, C, D, blah, blah, blah. Only 2 ways to build a media company today, scale or niche. Not everyone here is building a media company, and I'd much rather say that, especially if you're not building a media company, I would encourage you to focus on being niche, super serving an audience, and make sure your niche is really valuable. Because the bigger you get in the media world, the more you have to sell your soul. The more you have to reach a larger audience, the more you have to produce more content, and your brand gets diluted over time. Think of the biggest brands that you know. You probably care about them much less than the small ones that you have some kind of a relationship with. And I'm not willing to compromise that because I think that that is a race to the bottom when the future ultimately is about long-term brand trust and value and engagement. So I think it's all about this, user engagement, I just said that. And by the way, why? And the answer is because if you can really engage people, build an amazing relationship with them, you can monetize them better than anyone else can. You can monetize them through sponsorships, which we do with brand partners like a Target or a Fitbit. You can monetize them in other ways. You can sell them products and services. You can send them to conferences. You've built up a relationship with them in a way that is truly, truly valuable, as opposed to getting their clicks and their impressions. This is our 5-year plan that includes theme parks. I don't know why I'm adding that in. All right. Don't raise too much money from the wrong folks. Wow, this is aggressive. Forgot I wrote that. Wow. Point of the story is, if you're not into this, if you think that you're creating content to generate lots of impressions and clicks so that you can make a lot of money and then sell out, good luck. Genuinely, I hope you're very successful. But this stuff is really hard, and if you really care, you could build something amazing, long-term of value that changes the way people think about their lives, changes the way they define themselves, introduces them to a community they've never experienced, adds so much value to the world. Content is like an amazing power, and I would encourage you to wield it with some sense of responsibility. People in health and wellness in my market, right, have been doing it the easy way because it's extremely easy. And it's led to what sometimes I call like a self-confidence crisis, and it's led to a huge obesity epidemic. We have grown up looking at magazines that show people looking a way that we don't know anyone around us who actually looks that way. It's not really possible to look that way and maintain that, except in a very extremely small amount of cases. And that's messed with our heads and messed with our minds and messed with our self-image. And so I would encourage you to wield this with amazing responsibility. If you can create great content, there's so many ways for you to monetize a real, engaged, awesome audience, and I'd be happy to help if that's what you're doing. Not just I'm happy to help, but genuinely, love this stuff. And the more great stuff that's out there, the better. We filled this role. Sorry. Yay! But we're hiring for other roles, I'm sure. Greatist.com/careers. Okay. I was supposed to ask you guys for something, but now I don't know what I'm supposed to ask for. Follow us on Instagram. That sounds awesome. It's really cool. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing on Instagram right now. Q&A, but not, who's in charge of the Q&A?
I'm going to do it right down here.
Okay.
You got me? Left. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, hey.
So, all right, guys, so thank you for the questions. First of all, we have somebody in the audience who believes you're their soulmate, just letting you know. I don't know where, but yeah. So
too bad it's not my girlfriend who's also in the audience. It's fine. But whatever.
Okay. So first question, you mentioned the contributor aspect.
Yeah.
What percentage of your content do you create versus via contributors?
Well, you'll hate this answer, but basically 99% of our content is produced in-house. We've got a team of 10 editors, a total team of 40. A quarter of them are editors, and from day one, I would say 90% of our content is produced in-house. We turn away most guest posts. We're extremely aggressive about it, again, because we think every single article should sound like and feel like us. And again, most content in health and wellness, unfortunately, doesn't. And so we're very protective about it. We do have some contributors, of course, but we tend to kind of brainwash them and get them to write more in our style. Very different approach than most media companies.
Related question, and I think anybody, media company or anything really kind of struggles with this from a content perspective. How do you go about hiring the right people to produce this content in that voice? I mean, it's hard in an interview you can tell to some extent, but does somebody have the right voice for your brand? You're figuring that out early.
Hiring, yeah. This is everything. Hiring is like everything about building a business is about finding people who can translate so if voice is like the manifestation of our brand, us hiring one writer who doesn't sound like us, right, or doesn't improve upon us, right, like I mentioned earlier, I think that Greatist sounded like me when we launched. It doesn't sound like me as much, but it's because it's gotten meaningfully better. And the different people that we've hired, these different writers, have actually shaped it with people who are meaningfully more funny than me, meaningfully more like clever than me, really people who are better than me in most things. And they shaped like the way that our voice sounded and evolved in a way that I think is really standout and unique. So how do we hire for that? Well, first, they have to get to a really high bar. The hardest thing, frankly, to teach is not the voice. It's actually being extremely research-focused, writing extremely well, like being a great writer, and being good at editing in case we're hiring you as an editor. And so those are sort of the table stakes. You have to truly be great at all those things. And then you have to live the life. You have to be a greatist. And if you're a greatist, people tend to be just relieved that they can finally write about health and wellness in the way that they wished it would be written about. Half of our staff probably comes from places that you would all know and recognize, and I think write about health and wellness all wrong. And a big part of that is because that's drives clicks, and that's how they sell magazines. And so our audience, our writers tend to come from there, and when they open their mouths and say, I'm tired of this body shaming bullshit, we're like, that is what we wanted to hear. Thank you for saying that.
On that note, you mentioned clicks, and the reason they do that is to monetize the business. How do you guys monetize the business?
Right, so we monetize, again, and I think if you're betting your business on display advertising, you're in trouble. Traditional standard display ads are going in literally the opposite direction of what you'd like. We monetize through what we call brand partnerships, but they're basically really high-level marketing and branded content campaigns. We pitch brands that we know millennials who are trying to get healthy. Sometimes we literally say millennials who give a shit about their health. We know them better than anyone else on the planet. We speak their language. We can activate and engage them better than any of these brands can. And then we also have this huge sort of distribution, across all these different social platforms, the biggest and fastest growing group of them online. And so we sort of mix those two things together and create amazing branded content that these brands don't have very limited influence on, right? It's about awareness and changing and shifting the way people in our audience think of their brand. Those are big, big, big deals. And we're profitable most of last year. This year we raised money, so we are not profitable. But next year we should be back to profitable. And every brand is trying to figure out how to actually engage with millennials who give a shit about their health. It's really hard, and we do it uniquely well.
I have a question.
And we also have impressions. It's like we have that too, but in an ideal world, those are gone, and all we're really doing is these amazing campaigns in which all these different pieces are best serving our audience.
I have a question, working at a media company. So I completely agree with you. You mentioned it's going to where your audience is. The idea of a website is going to be archaic in the future. At the same time, though, you have, like, when you are so reliant on these platforms, which constantly change their algorithms, I mean, I, again, totally agree with you, but is there like how do you handle that, where when Facebook changes their algorithm and all of a sudden you're not getting that traction, you're kind of at their, they can do what they want.
I mean, so I think the role of like a CEO and a founder is to be unbelievably optimistic about the future and crazy paranoid about the present. So I tend to think all the time that anything we're over-relying on is dangerous. When Pinterest became 70% of our traffic, I said, we need to get good at everything else, right? And so, Facebook, I think, we're seeing that lesson play out on a really big scale right now, where everyone in our space who was larger than us for a hot second because of Facebook is now a third of our size because of Facebook. Over-reliance on any platform is very dangerous. At the same time, I think not being on the platforms is a terrible mistake. So I think the key is you need to be really well spread out, and you do need to find some way to engage your audience that's uniquely yours. I think most people who are complaining about, there's a real difference in my mind between like service journalism and real stuff that people actually want and are bookmarking and sharing with their friends, and like who wrote about the John Oliver thing that he did Sunday night, Monday morning. It's like commodity news and commodity memes and like that world. It's really hard to build a brand on that, and then it's really hard to have real engagement, which is really hard to monetize. And so I would say that if you're doing it, do it right. And I tend to be a lot less concerned about these platforms because I'm not over-reliant on any of them. And we've worked really hard to be that way at Greatist.
Awesome. By the way, guys, keep the questions coming. We got time for like 2, 3, 4 more maybe. So are you going to stick with millennials 20 years from now when they're 50? Or are you always going to stay with the 20 to 30-year-old group? Are you going to stick with your guys?
Yeah. It's a good question. The good news is that millennials are still going to be an enormous generation, at least as long as we're alive. So that's good. If we can nail that audience, trust me, we'll build an amazing business just with that audience alone. I think the way that you build truly, like, my dream is to build this business for the next 50 years, to evolve and to scale into a leader that can manage that growth at every single different level. And that will mean, approaching and resonating with younger and younger audiences. But my trick is just going to be hiring them. I think that anyone who's trying to engage with a demographic that they're not in is kidding themselves.
Awesome. How do you figure out what type topics to write about? I think this is just any company creating content. Is there a specific process you guys have? I know you mentioned it's kind of seeing what people are talking about, writing the best article, but is there like a specific process you could kind of walk us through for picking what you cover?
Yeah, usually we say it comes from 3 different things. The first is we hire amazing editors and trust their judgment. The second thing is we're heavily data focused in terms of what succeeded for us before and what's succeeding elsewhere. And the third thing is we just talk to our audience nonstop and see what they're sharing and want to know about. We sort of mix those 3 things together, and that's how we decide what we're covering. You'd think that health and wellness, some people might think that health and wellness doesn't have a lot to cover. I remember in the early days, people were like, what about when you run out of like stuff to write about? We'll never run out of stuff to write about. Health is like, like we write about poop health, we write about relationships, we write about health insurance, we did a whole week on busting the stigma around STIs, STDs. Like there are so many topics for the way people are trying to improve and get better, and health means something profoundly different to people today than it ever did. Millennials, 73% of millennials would rather be healthy than wealthy. It's like a sea change. It's like a crazy statistic. No other generation has been like that. It's a sea change, profound shift in the way this audience think about health and what it means in their lives. And so we have no lack of topics to cover because of it.
Okay, last question. How do you cater to both men and women audiences?
So we are a gender-neutral brand. It's something I take very seriously. We reach, I think it's 65%, sometimes 70, depending on what platform we're on, 70% female. The unfortunate truth is that women tend to be more interested in a lot of these topics, but that doesn't mean that men are not interested in these topics. We've been written up a few times as the best site for guys who are trying to get healthy but don't want to get huge. There's no real site serving guys like that. I actually think gender neutrality is the way of the future. I tend to think that if you focus on, it's like maybe at odds with like narrowing down your audience. Would it be easier to create more relevant content if we went all in on women? I think the answer, frankly, is yeah, it would be easier. But long term, I think it would be less valuable. And the reason is simply because we have a mostly female team. We found that women are tired of being told they're all the same and tired of being sort of generalized as like interested in the same things in terms of their health and wellness. The science is almost always the same, except in a few cases. And so we tend to think gender neutrality is the way of the future. We're very focused on that, but that sometimes means in every piece of our content, we're not trying to judge who's reading it. And it also means that when we do pick on topics like, I don't know, menstruation, right, which is clearly not written for guys, I think, right? Those topics, we are very clear about how, like, this is for women, right? But we also write guy topics that are mostly for guys. Most of it, the majority, is for everyone who's just trying to improve and get better. And men and women are shockingly similar in that respect, believe it or not. So I'm very bullish on this idea. And I think it's and not just because I'm a dude, not just because I've gone through a personal journey and continue to struggle today with my health in a way that some people will look at me and be like, I can't tell you how many people will say, like, that's such a traditionally female story. And it's like just the media messing with your mind. If you think guys are not struggling with their body image and their weight and their mental health, you're wrong. Right? We struggle with it a lot too. And so I think that's why it's a gender-neutral brand, is because that mindset and that approach, I think, is so extraordinarily important to everyone.
Awesome. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Derek.